Hello, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. We're going to look some more at another travelogue at the Canol pipeline. When they brought the supplies up there, they didn't bring it up the highway. They used a water route that had been the main route into the north for many years. The Alaska Highway wasn't really built yet. And I'll show you about that water route, barges and caterpillars on ice, that kind of thing. And the other thing we'll do in this travelogue right at the end, we'll do a comparison with the big Alaska pipeline that's the modern one up there now. And we'll see how this old Canol pipeline compared with this new Alaska oil pipeline. So come on, let's take a look. We'll start with the Canol. It took decades of discussion and debate to figure out the exact route for the Alaska Highway. But for the Canol Highway, one airplane flight over the area and the basic route was decided. The surveyors were on the ground and native guides, Indian and Métis people, were hired to help the surveyors make their way as they walked across the route of the future pipeline. The U.S. military brought in the supplies for the pipeline. Some of these supplies came by rail from Skagway and Whitehorse. However, most of it came by water and from the other direction. And then once it got to the pipeline route, it was hauled up and down the route by trucks. Machinery, the metal pipe, and the wire for the accompanying telephone line was all heavy stuff, and it was better sent by boat than over rail or truck. The Alaska Highway was not yet usable, so supplies were freighted in over lakes and rivers, and again from the other direction. Let's take a look at this map. Just look where they had to get to the top of the green line, which was the pipeline at Norman Wells. And the blue line represents the water route to get there. And they started down in the lower right-hand corner of this map. In the province of Alberta, Edmonton was a big supply kicking off center, and they went north through Fort McMurray, which became the greatest oil find in North America, but ironically, nobody knew about it at the time. So they hauled tons of heavy material over the unknown oil bed there at Fort McMurray. They got into the Athabasca River, as you can see on the map. They went north up to Lake Athabasca, and then the lake between, the river between Lake Athabasca and Great Slave Lake is the Slave River. And they went through a place called Fort Smith, some narrow rapids there. They got the equipment on the lake, and there's stories there about crossing that lake on thinner ice than they should have. It's a huge lake. But they went across Great Bear Lake with their floated equipment, and they got onto the Mackenzie River, the blue line going out of Great Slave Lake, and you can see by the arrows, they went up to Norman Wells, and eventually the equipment went down the green pipeline route, eventually to Whitehorse. But this is how most of the material for the pipeline was shipped into the north. All kinds of equipment was hauled in for both work on the pipeline and the highway. Things like portable sawmills, tractors, graders, cranes, carryalls, and pile drivers. The workhorse on both the highway and the pipeline was the D8 Caterpillar. It smashed down trees, moved boulders, dug up the earth as it snowplowed over everything in its way. It was the critical road and pipeline builder, what the camel was to the desert, the elephant was to India, what the kayak was to the Inuit, and what the horse was for the early Western Indian and cowboy. Time was of the essence. There was no time for repairs to be made. Machinery that broke down often was abandoned and replaced by equipment that was working. Spring and summer brought a new challenge. Mosquito nets were essential. At times, they were so thick you could not talk or eat without them getting into your mouth. The men said that the mosquitoes tasted like pepper on the food. They held a contest to see who could tolerate the largest number of mosquitoes biting their arms. At night, they penciled squares on tents and counted the number of mosquitoes that gathered on the square as the men lay in the bed staring upward at the inside of the tent roof. You know, we're pretty deep into the north here, and this is mosquito country. And you know, in the days when they built the Alaska Highway, they had trouble with the mosquitoes. People would fly from one community to another, and they didn't realize it, but instead of getting on an airplane, they were getting on a mosquito, and they were never heard of again. So to counteract that, they brought in a bunch of red paint, and they painted all of the small airplanes red, so they could tell the difference between an airplane and a mosquito. And I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but there were these two mosquitoes flying around, and they saw this fella hiking on the trail down below. So they looked at each other and they said, "Should we get him?" And the other mosquito said, "You betcha." So they flew down and stuck their beaks into that hiker, and they killed him. And they're sitting there by the trail wondering. One mosquito says to the other one, he says, "Should we eat him here, or should we take him down by the river and eat him?" The other mosquito said, "No, no, no. Let's not go down to the river. Those big mosquitoes down there will take him from us and eat him on us." So mosquitoes are no small things up in this country. Tents provided temporary mobile shelters that could readily be moved as the road or pipeline advanced. Ropes were tied to trees if the ground was frozen too hard to drive in the stakes. Small campfires helped offset the cold. You know, just as a summary comment, the Canol pipeline was panic-driven, ill-conceived, a staggering blunder, and a colossal mistake. It was abandoned soon after it was built, leaving an environmental disaster. Moose, bear, and a host of other wildlife got tangled in the telephone wire laying on the ground. They licked the partly oil barrels for years. Only recently has the Canadian government made efforts to clean up the leftover mess. It has been, indeed, a dark story. Hey, somebody turned the light off in the bar. There we are, got a little light. Hey, before we wrap up this travelogue, let's take a quick comparison with the old pipeline that we've been talking about, the Canol. Let's compare it with that big new one they've got up in Alaska that runs from Prudhoe Bay down to Valdez. Let's do a little pipeline comparison between the old and the new. That building we're looking at is one of the old outhouses built along both the Alaska Highway and the Canol pipeline. One door and space for black workers and another door and space for white. Things were segregated in those days. But let's do a pipeline comparison. Look at the top, the blue Canol pipeline with the Alaska pipeline. And let's work down the yellow headings there. 1943 for the Canol pipeline. The Alaska pipeline, the new modern one, was built 34 years later. And a lot of technology changed since those days. And It took about the same time to build them, 2 years and 3 years. The length, not that much difference. All around the one a little less than 1,000 kilometers, and the new one a little more than 1,000 kilometers. But here in the next one, pipe size, that's where we start to see the difference. The Canol was only 4 inches in diameter. Look at the size of pipe at the new one, 4 feet, or 122 centimeters. And how long did the early one last? Just 1 year. The new Alaska pipeline has been going since it was built, which is quite a few years now. And let's look at the ground surface base. They just laid the pipe on the ground in the old Canol pipeline. But in the new one, everything is above ground, so that permafrost is not interfered with, and the pipe rests on big metal supports. Now, let's go down and look at the amount refined. The Canol ran a little less than a year, and they refined a total of 1 million barrels. Look at the new Alaska pipeline. They can do a minimum of 300 barrels a day, or a maximum of 2 million barrels a day, twice what the total output of the Canol pipeline and the refinery in Whitehorse produced. So you can really see a big difference in the two pipelines. Now, let's just take one last quick look at the safety that has been built in over those years. But in the new Alaska pipeline, they can recover 75,000 barrels per hour on a spill, and they can stop the flow within 15 minutes. Let's just look down. They've put in on average 300 big oil tankers, ships hauling that oil away annually, and they're escorted. Here's a big safety feature. Those ships are escorted 100 kilometers or more away out into the ocean before they're on their own. Now, if you look at the record of decline in spills, in the beginning there were more spills in the Alaska pipeline. I don't have the numbers with me, but as you look over the years, those spills have become significantly less to 5 or less. And when I say spills, some of those spills are really only minor leaks in the pipeline. So a great deal of progress has been made in that direction. And the Alaska pipeline has survived all kinds of external factors that might have broken it up, like fires. People have even taken shots, gunfire at it. And it has survived a number of earthquakes. So safety is built into these new pipelines that was totally unheard of in the early days when the old Canol pipeline was built. There's always the issue of the economic advantage of a pipeline versus the environmental concerns. But as you can see, as the time goes by, we've handled the environmental end of it a whole lot better than we did originally. Well, okay, we're doing some more Alaska travelogues. There's a lot to see up here in the Alaska and the Yukon. So hit the subscribe button and you'll be notified when other ones are coming up. Until then, it's so long for now. Don Barnett, I Go Travel. And hey, maybe we'll hear some wolf howls before this show is over.